All right, people, welcome to today's roundtable. First time we're streaming live to the Mighty Mum group as well. I've got a bit tech savvy over the last couple of days, so we're live on Facebook just in case people don't know how to use Zoom, and we're obviously on here as well. So tonight we got our registered psychologist, Jacob, that has been on a couple of times now. So some of you that know him know that he's really, really awesome in what he talks about and talks all things to do with the mindset. And so tonight, I'm going to ask him a couple of questions and we will dive a little bit into certain topics. And at any point, feel free to yell out, or don't yell actually because you're on mute. Just wave at us and we'll be able to answer any questions along the way. Hey, Francis. So, okay, so Jacob, thanks for coming on board. So we obviously have all the mums here and they're ready to go. Hello, Ida. And I guess the topic that I see very happens quite often is this idea of perfectionism, this idea of sorry, Ida. This idea that if I'm not perfect, I rather not do something or start a program or whatever it is. And I think it's just natural as human beings that we have this high expectation of ourselves. So, I just want your thoughts on what perfectionism is and why we sort of have these high expectations of ourselves.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I guess to start with, when you talk about perfectionism, people can come up with all sorts of opinions and attitudes towards it. Some might be positive because they really identify with that and they can see some of the results that it gets them in life, doing really well at their job and having really, things in order and that type of thing, which obviously just leads to a sense of comfort. But other times, again, you can see the other side of perfectionism, which it can really start to take its toll on, say, someone's health. It can lead to a lot of stress, or it actually might cause them to not do as well at work because it's making them miss deadlines or whatever it be, right? So when you're talking about perfectionism and why we're even talking about it in this context, I think it's really good to lay the foundation that it's going to be that type of trait or that type of mindset that Aaron says that could really either help or hinder you in your goals, especially when it comes to health and fitness. But this is obviously speaking a lot broader than that, because as Aaron's program takes the approach very holistically, it's all about actually getting a really healthy mindset so there's not enough stress, right? There's not as much stress in our life, which then allows us to continue on, kicking goals and doing really what we want to be doing. So to kind of come back to this idea of perfectionism, if you can see it on a bit of a continuum, right? And I think we have to really keep a really good perspective on perfectionism, because what we're not talking about is that really driven, healthy pursuit of excellence and having some really high standards. So this is to go on the record and say there's actually nothing too wrong with having those high standards, okay? But where we can see perfectionism become a bit of a problematic trait or a problematic mindset is when it becomes more of a defensive move. And when I say a defensive move, I mean it's a defensive move because you're more worried about what people think, as opposed to having a very internal motivation, a drive to meeting high standards and pursuing excellence in itself. And so again, you can kind of see the difference there of actually being focused on the process and actually the outcome of doing something well based on your own effort, or again, it being more about avoiding bad opinions of other people. So again, we might pursue perfectionism because I think if I make any mistakes, people will think I'm stupid or people will think I'm incompetent. So therefore, in order to avoid that opinion of people, I then need to do everything absolutely perfect. And you can see how, therefore, the perfectionism is a bit more of a drive from a defensive point of view. So again, we're not eliminating this mindset that we want to have high standards, that we want to actually have goals that we want to shoot for, that we have drive and a pursuit for excellence. But we need to be really mindful of when it slips into the unhealthy form of perfectionism, especially when it goes into other areas of our life around maybe social status, our friendships, our idea of belonging, that it's more focused about what people think. So again, I think it's really, really important when we start talking about perfectionism that we've always got that balance and perspective of again, is it a defensive move or is it actually a healthy pursuit of some goals and expectations that I have of myself? So does that answer or set up your first initial question there? Yes. Did you have a follow-up question to that? Oh, you're still on mute, Aaron.
Hello.
There we go.
Okay. Yeah. So what I got out of that is obviously not eliminating that we have high standards, but more looking at it when it becomes, I guess, a negative meaning to it, where we're looking at perfectionism of pleasing people or trying to meet someone's expectations, which pretty much causes us to become someone that we don't necessarily want to be, or have this ideal that we need to become someone in order to get approval from other people. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that idea of approval and even the idea of self-worth comes into it a lot. So when we talk about perfectionism in a negative sense, it's that really unrelenting high standard that we have of self that leads to a lot of stress. It can lead to being on edge all the time and being quite tense. But the other determining factor is when we believe that whether we perform perfect or not is actually an indicator of our worth. And that's where, again, we know it's coming out of a more defensive move because we're now trying to defend our sense of self-image or self-worth based on what we're doing. And that's where some of the perfectionistic behavior can obviously spill out as that defense. So, yeah, exactly right.
And I want to tap into this thing about being all or nothing. And this is something that myself is something that I try and work through is I'm either training really hard or I'm eating really bad. And
yeah,
I think this ties in with perfectionism, and it ties in with if I'm not going to be perfect, then I'd rather just be horrible. I'm not going to sit in the middle here. So could you explain a bit about why we have that mindset of, I need to do this really, really well, and as soon as I stuff up, I'm just going to be really, really bad.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you mentioned the term there before, but what we're referring to there is a very common way of thinking, which is black and white thinking. We see it quite a few times with people who are, looking to overcome challenges or hit goals, or whether they find their thinking. Black and white thinking can very much be that thing that, as I said before, it can either help or hinder you. And the reason for that is because of Aaron said, there needs to be a level of flexibility. So, when you have your goals and you have your expectations, aim for the high standard, but have it be reasonable. If you feel like you're actually not going to be quite making that target, there's the black and white thinking that can then lead you to think, okay, well, I might as well abandon all of that altogether. But if you bring it into actually a context where, okay, well, hey, you know what? The 5-minute walk that I do is better than the 5-kilometer run that I don't do. And so it's, again, about actually taking mindset of the process. So black and white thinking can really be an issue when we're so focused on the outcome. Okay, and if that's probably one of the key things that everyone takes away from today, it'll probably be a really helpful thing, is that when we're looking to overcome perfectionism, or when we're looking to really move away from some of these unhealthy mindsets that don't help us in forming habits, it's the primary focus needing to be on the process rather than the outcome. Okay. Now, again, if we relate that back to this idea of self-worth, right, we can find our self-worth in the outcome, but there's so much riding on that. And there are so many other factors that could potentially take us off course, or even things that are outside of our control that can mean that the outcome doesn't actually ever happen. But when we instead actually pay attention to the process and the little things, the little steps that we are doing along the way, and we find our sense of significance, and not our personal worth and value, but definitely a sense of achievement and accomplishment in the little things that we're doing, the process, then that's actually where we're going to be experiencing a really stepping away from this idea of perfectionism. Because again, perfectionism assumes that by the end of the day, there is no blemish into what I'm doing or who I present to be, right? It's actually achieving this perfect state where you can't get any better. And so you're at this endpoint. So that's the outcome. But instead, if you focus on, growing yourself, or even your approach to health and fitness, raising kids, doing work, whatever it be, I think everyone would actually agree that to live a perfect life and have a perfect job with a perfect family is pretty unattainable. And I think most people would actually begin to believe that, but still we fall into this mindset where we're pursuing perfectionism. And again, I think it's because we're so focused on what the outcome would say about us, and particularly our worth. So again, flipping that on its head and actually saying, okay, well, how can I reiterate, or rather reemphasize the process of becoming healthy, the process of becoming a great mom, the process of becoming a great employee, or whatever it is that we're doing, that is actually going to be the best motivator, the really thing that spurs us on, because now there's not so much of a, as I said before, high standard on the end result. Because again, when we focus on, okay, well, what am I doing daily? That's where you don't have the black and white mentality anymore, because you're not just saying, well, I haven't hit that long-term target. So it's about in the here and now, more or less. So I hope that it kind of answers your black and white kind of idea.
Yeah, perfect. And I think what you said there is perfect. And that's the thing, is that people will focus all on the result and don't understand to enjoy the process along the way. So they have this goal, whatever it is, lose 15 kilos or et cetera, and they hit that 15 kilos. And they're still upset because they never actually understood the process and was grateful for the process. And I like progression equals fulfillment. And we set all these goals, and I used to get upset because I didn't hit them all. But when I look back, the year before, I actually progressed a lot more. But all I was looking was the outcome. And that's ultimately why we set goals. It's to progress and to be better than we were yesterday. And if I think outcomes are the only reason or the only thing that's going to make me happy, if I get that weight, I'm happy. If I get that car, I'll be happy. Perfect example was Robin Williams. He had everything. He, was the best actor, won all these awards, and he killed himself. So that shows me that outcomes are not the reason for happiness. Outcomes are not the reason for your fulfillment. It's progression, and it's being better than yesterday. Very simple. And what Jacob's saying is to enjoy the process, because it can't be a black or white. I hit my goal, I'm happy. I don't hit my goal, I'm upset. It's just like when you hop on the scale. I lose weight, I'm happy. I don't lose weight, I'm upset. It's the process that you're better than yesterday in whatever it is. And it's making it really, really simple and saying, what did I do yesterday and what can I do better today? And it could be very, very simple, and breaking it down. And the compound effect over a year's time is you're way better than you were at the start of the year. Now it's 2 years and you're constantly becoming better every single day. Great. Okay. And now I want to
just jump in there, Aaron, because I think you talk about this process of progress, and that's so accurate. But I think even on the other side, it's the process of, even when you're not experiencing that, incremental rise, sometimes there are the ebbs and flows. Sometimes there's the 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But again, if your self focus is not on the outcome and hitting targets, but the process, you'll be okay with stepping back because you're more in love with the process of becoming healthy. Right? And so again, it's always important to be reevaluating your goals, and when you hit your goal, come up with the next goal, and that keeps you going. So that's one way to do it. But again, the idea of actually, the whole reason why being in this program, yes, the signposts and maybe the measurables that we're doing well is that we're losing weight, but ultimately, hopefully, we're all here to become healthier. Right? That's the whole idea of why we're doing what we're doing. And when we have that, there's no end point to that. And so again, that is a lifelong process. And so when we're actually engaged and we're loving that process, there's no sense of perhaps setbacks or slip-ups that we have that'll really take us off course or make us leave programs or whatever, because we're so engaged and in love with the process of becoming a healthy person, right? There's no sense of a rival point at health. And so again, when we focus on, well, how do I then actually fall in love with the process of becoming a healthy person? That's what's actually going to ensure longevity. That's what's going to ensure this real zest of loving what we're doing.
Awesome. Is this good stuff? Is this clear? I think it's a common theme that I see, not just with this group, but a common theme with every human being. So if we can share this message more, I think we'll be helping a lot of people along the way. And the next thing I want to tie into is sort of ties in with perfectionism, or why someone doesn't start a program, or why someone doesn't fully commit, is this idea of fear of failure. Fear of maybe what people think, or just fear in general. So I guess I want to get your thoughts on what is fear of failure? Why does it inhibit people to take action, even when they know that they should?
Yeah. Yeah, I think a really good framework to understand that, and coming off the back of this idea that we must fall in love with the process, is this framework that's actually introduced by a lady called Carol Dweck, and she's infamous in the education sphere. And what she introduces is this idea of growth mindset. Some of you may have heard of it before. And so growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset. So traditionally, a lot of people would think the fixed mindset approach, which means that people are born with particular skills. People are born with particular potential, and that's kind of just set on that one trajectory. But the growth mindset knows that, well, skills are actually built. And again, there's actually a focus on getting better as opposed to not looking bad. So when we approach whatever it is that we're doing, whether it's a health and fitness or, again, raising family, being in workplace, doing whatever, attaining a balance, there's this idea that if we adopt what we call a growth mindset, there's the belief that we can get better and the focus on getting better itself. So that process idea. So someone who's coming from a fixed mindset will believe that they're born with what they got. It's their genetics. They can't necessarily improve it. There might be some little things that within a margin they can improve, but ultimately that's the way that it's going to be. Their intellect or their confidence or even, again, their physical health, right? So there's that mentality as well. But then also there's the focus on what I can do about it. So there's the belief that, you know, those types of skills are built, but also that I can. So when you have a growth mindset, when we talk about failure, it's not a threat. Because for someone with a fixed mindset who believes that, you know, they can only achieve so much to a certain point, when they hit that point and then they fail, that's a confirmation that they can't grow anymore. And so that's not really fitting too well with them. So again, they might then start to fear, you know, stepping out with that project or fear giving it a go or whatever, because generally they may not believe that they can't do it. But when we adopt a bit of a growth mindset, we see failure not as a roof or a ceiling as to what we can do, but more as feedback. Feedback as to what's not working or how we need to change our approach. So again, this idea that failure is feedback is what's actually going to limit the amount of fear that you feel towards it. Because again, the person with a fixed mindset is gonna fear failure. They're actually not gonna want to receive feedback. They're gonna shy away from putting in the effort, because why put in the effort if you believe that your skills are already set in cement? You know, they're gonna rise to challenges because they believe that challenges are actually going to help them develop new skills and become a better person. And as I said before, they value feedback because that feedback is going to place a valuable input into how they can get better and grow their skills and grow their health or better their health. So really, we need to start approaching this idea that, well, failure is feedback. And I think that comes into a similar topic that we were talking about the last time, which I know only a few of the ladies were able to log on, but we were talking about this idea of how to deal with setbacks, and ultimately this idea of self-compassion and being kind to self, because it's so easy to beat ourselves up coming into this idea of high standards, that we can say, oh, you know what, like I completely stuffed that up. I'm absolutely terrible. What am I even doing here? I'm not good enough. But that type of language keeps us kind of really cemented down in that idea of there's nothing I can do about it. But instead, if we start to actually change our language and say, okay, well, what have I learned about this? What worked and what didn't work? How can I use that then to improve? We can see that any sense of mistake is actually a way forward, because we can take something from it. You know, if it helps, I kind of think of FAIL, FAIL, as an acronym for first action in learning. And again, so any time that I have a mistake or a sense of failure, I say, okay, well, how can I actually then know that I can grow from this? And so let's adopt that new approach to move forward. But for the person with a perfectionistic mindset, that can be pretty difficult. So I guess that's why we're here, right? Because I think it might be even worthwhile to dive into perfectionism a little bit and see if we can maybe even help some of the people online here to overcome that, to really understand it at a deeper level, and hopefully equip not just maybe one or two of you, but all of you with some skills and practical tools to actually start to chip away at that mindset and that type of tendency, if you will. So I wonder if anyone's maybe even brave enough to give us a wave if you think that you actually would maybe find this to be a familiar thing for you, that you actually probably do resonate with this idea of perfectionism a little bit. Anyone? Yeah, Linda? Anyone else? Yeah, Sandra as well. All right, so why don't we hear from, let's go Linda first. And maybe Linda, if you don't mind, I think Aaron will unmute you there. Tell us a little bit about perhaps what areas in your life you think you demonstrate this idea of perfectionism?
Definitely in my work life,
Okay.
and with my family. And I think that because I have so many other areas going well, my health and fitness has always been something where I've gone, oh, well, I can't be perfect at everything. So I actually see perfectionism in my health world as being an excuse zone rather than a motivator, or and also I have been prone to, the moment I slip up with my eating or my program, just to throw the whole thing off. So it's sort of, I can be all or nothing. I'm getting better at that through Aaron, but
sure. That's good.
Historically, that has been my MO.
Okay, so that tendency towards perfectionism, you mentioned that the area you demonstrate that is in, maybe one area is work.
Yeah.
What do you think are some of the perfectionistic behaviors, if you will, that you demonstrate with work specifically? So, some examples of that might be kind of reassurance seeking or consistent checking, repeating different behaviors to make sure that you're kind of at that perfect standard. What do you think?
Probably over-investing. So I'm a teacher. I work with Irene, so I'm familiar.
Right.
So it's not uncommon for me to stay up till 2 or 3 in the morning so that my lessons are perfect. I will over format a worksheet, which a kid will then just screw up or glue in their book or cut out messy, and I'm there going, do you know how long I've spent on this? Over preparation is typically my my way of acting out my perfectionism in that regard. And so, and then it just becomes exhausting. But then you set yourself up for this high expectation of everybody. And so then you feel like you have to meet everybody's expectations because you have a reputation of doing things well. So then everything has to be bigger and better every time. And then it can become overwhelming. And so other things then slide, such as health and fitness.
Yeah, and so as you say, you have to maintain that reputation now of being the person who always has a perfect lesson and doing that. And so you mentioned exhausting there, which I'm sure for many people, again, would find to be, if they are going through perfectionistic tendencies, quite a common downfall to it, right? Now, we can see the added benefit there where you're obviously someone who's quite reputable in your workplace, someone sees you as quite well professional and reliable, but again, here you are behind the scenes being completely exhausted.
It's nuts. And it's unsustainable at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And so again, when we talk about that high standard that you said you have of yourself, do you actually think it's of yourself, or do you think it's of other people?
No, it starts with myself, absolutely, and always has. And I have passed that excellent trait on to my children. So now I have 4 mini-me's who run around stressed too, or 3 out of 4 at least. And I see through them how unhealthy it is, but you can't do as I say, not as I do.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so what do you think?
It starts with me because I want to do well. Like I know that, and if I could get my health and fitness under control, then I would be on top of the world, because it's the one thing that, because I let go of it, because I excuse make, but then I get really hard on myself because of it. So just ebb and flow in this cycle.
And so what Linda's sharing there, and again, what I think a lot of people would find to be true with their own sense of perfectionism in whatever area of life it is, as it can be work, it can be family, is that there are particular behaviors that look to reinforce that behavior, right? So Linda's talking about this sense of over preparation, right? This idea of kind of going above and beyond, spending hours and hours and hours on these lesson plans or whatever it be. But for many other people, it can be a similar thing. It might be, for example, that they have to check their emails at least 3 times and proofreading it so that when they send it off, there's no spelling mistakes. Because if there was, that would be the absolute bane of their existence. People would think they're absolutely incompetent, and so therefore they waste all their time and a lot of stress and energy on checking these emails, right? So again, people might start to say, okay, well, hey, that's the one area that I think I want to maybe work on. And so Linda, again, you recognize, you've got maybe these traits in this one area. So thank you so much for sharing. I guess we'll stop picking on you now. We'll move on to maybe someone else, because again, I think where you go from that, what Linda shared, is now you ask yourself whether you're ready to change or not. And that's one of the biggest things right now. There are so many different obstacles that can stand in the way of our change readiness. Many of them just even being these kind of rules and assumptions that we have about self that are very well ingrained from perhaps when we were being brought up. But this idea of, okay, well, how ready am I for change? You know, and if you're not quite sure if you are ready for change or not, you have to ask yourself the question of, okay, well, how do I weigh up what some of the positive traits of perfectionism are, but how do I also weigh up the negative? And so we just did that with Linda. But then you actually then find out, okay, well, what are the benefits of actually loosening those really high standards that I have of self? And I'm sure we haven't heard from Linda, but I'm sure she would agree. Well, if I actually loosened up those high standards, I could probably put away the extensive hours I put into lesson plans to then go to bed earlier. Maybe even be able to invest so much more energy into kids and reading them bedtime stories or doing whatever it takes to again actually be more invested at home, and then you wake up the next day more refreshed, right? So that's the benefits of it, but it's also actually really, really I guess beneficial to see some of the negatives as well. But that's where we have to adjust our expectations, because a negative that we see in Linda's situation might be, well, you know what, my lesson plan won't be as prepared, or I might have to be a little bit more on the run in the morning to get together my resources, okay? But that's when we ask ourselves the question of, well, why would that be so bad? Okay, so what is it about that I'm so uncomfortable with? And that's where we come right back to the very beginning of realizing whether our perfectionism is more about what other people think, or whether it's actually just a healthy pursuit of excellence, if that makes sense. So Sandra, you also kind of gave a bit of a wave for perfectionism. Mm-hmm. So why don't we hear from you a little bit about maybe what area you think that is and some of the behaviors you think you demonstrate?
Okay. Hi, Jacob. I've never really thought of myself as a perfectionist.
Yep.
But I was actually talking to Aaron about this afternoon. I'm an all or nothing with my nutrition. Like, I can be good for a few days, maybe a week, and then I'll eat badly, even if it's just one meal or one snack, and then it's just like, well, forget it for the day. And then I get really annoyed with myself because I've just blown like a week's worth of being good in a day or so. And that's where I think maybe I feel like I've got to be perfect or forget it kind of thing. Yeah. And it frustrates me because then it changes my whole mood because I've done it to myself and I can't, there's no excuses for it. Yeah, that's where I think I'm very all or nothing with that.
So when you talk about all or nothing, what do you think the, I guess, rule or assumption that you have of yourself is? So are you suggesting that, you must always eat healthy, or you must never have a treat? Is that what your thought process might be?
No, I think I'm realistic and know that you're going to have treats and you're going to have cheats and all that, because God knows I do. But I just feel like I don't know when to rein it in. Like I'll have a cheat or a cheat meal or a treat or something. And instead of thinking like, okay, I've done that now, that was great, I won't necessarily go back to eating well for a couple of days until I start to feel really yuck about myself and realise how much damage I've done to myself. Then I'll get back on and be good. And it's kind of a bit of a cycle. At the moment it is. It was really, really good for a few months there. And then kind of, I don't know, when Christmas hit and everything, I kind of just got into this cycle of eating good for a couple of days and then I'd blow it and then I'm like, I will bugger it for a few days. And yeah, it's just not a good way to be.
But does that, do you think, reveal the expectation of self that, again, you should never fall off the wagon, so to speak? Because you were saying before that you kind of, feel like you're in a place where you might have a cheat or whatever, but it's outside of what you expected. And so whenever it's outside of what you expect, that's when you think, okay, well, might as well blow it, right?
Yeah. I think it's, I just go, I don't know, my whole mindset. I mean, I know cheats are okay. Like, I'm realistic. I know you can't eat perfectly all the time. I mean, maybe some people can, but I don't. But I seem to, I don't know, as I said before, once I've had the cheat, or sometimes I do it mindlessly too. Like, I'm not even out for something sweet, but then I find that I'm eating something sweet. I'm like, why did I just do that? And then that's why I kind of think, oh, well, I've stuffed it up now. So, and then I kind of go off the rails for a few days there, and then I feel really lousy.
Yeah. And so again, if we take off that idea that, you talk about how in that one moment we realize that we're off the track, and so we start to feel really lousy about ourselves. I'm not sure if we still have the recording or if you were even there, Sandra, for the last session that we had, but this idea of, okay, well, how do I then in that moment even start to release myself of this really self-defeating behavior? Because what that does, it can really start to get us in that slump kind of, and this vicious cycle of, okay, well, now I'm going to feel bad about myself. And the minute that I start to feel bad about myself, I'm going to then start to look for something to make me feel good. And whilst we've got that chocolate bar in our hand, it's actually a pretty tempting thing to then say, okay, well, hey, great, chocolate makes me feel good. And so, you know, that type of strong willpower in that moment is
on my conversation with Aaron.
Yeah,
most of the times it's chocolate. But then I find that I more or less self-sabotage myself.
Yeah, right.
Like, you know, like I'm even aware that I'm doing it, and that I still do it. And I know that we've talked about it before with Aaron in the group, that like if you have a bad meal, that's fine, or you have a bad day, just get back on the program the next day. And I don't always do that. And then then I kind of just everything just goes out the window.
Yeah. No, and I think that can be a common experience for many others. And, you know, I think if anyone does have some kind of maybe familiarity with that, give us a wave as well. And if you have any maybe specific questions on that, because I think the expectations are huge, as you say, Sandra, you know, where it's so important to have a reasonable standard that, you know, you just mentioned, hey, I don't think everyone can eat completely healthy all the time. And whether that's true or not, to be honest, it's relevant for you. And I think if that's not what you know your standard to be, we have to adjust that. And again, I think to kind of nail down in on what we were saying before around this idea of perfectionism, if we were to have to kind of step it out, it's okay, well, do I feel that this maybe state of perfectionism is a bit of a growth area for me that might be leading to some black and white thinking, particularly with my diet or my workout regime? It's, well, let's pick an area that I believe I'm wanting to work on this one particular trait, right? That's kind of your first point of call. And then you say, okay, well, what are some of the specific perfectionistic behaviors that I think I do? So it might be the procrastination, as we said, it might be the reassurance seeking, it might be, you know, the kind of checking over our work or doing whatever. And then actually we say, okay, well, what are some goals that I can create to work towards not doing those things? So we kind of used the example with Linda before that, well, hey, if I'm spending hours and hours and hours, but I know that that's actually feeding into my perfectionism, how can I then actually, you know, go to bed a little bit out, like an hour earlier, and set that as my goal? Right now, obviously it's a lot easier said than done, but that's why we create a bit of a step ladder approach to say, hey, what's the one tiny thing that I can actually take that one step closer towards eradicating that perfectionistic behavior? And it comes with releasing that sense of high standard of self. So asking, okay, well, hey, what's a reasonable expectation here? You know, another one might be like household cleanliness. We might think that every single room has to be cleaned absolutely thoroughly before we can, I don't know, leave the house or sit down and watch a movie, let's just say on the weekend, right? But again, why don't we start to challenge that idea of black and white thinking where, okay, well, how do I then maybe clean a room but leave just maybe one thing out of place and let that sit with me and see how that feels? Now, it'll probably be a little bit tough. Some people might think, that's going to make me go crazy. I can see Nicole there. But that very much reveals this idea of, okay, well, how do I really set some practical goals to chip away at this tendency? And you'll be surprised. The more that you do it on that step ladder approach, the more that you'll actually be able to overcome it. Because again, it starts with one thing at a place. And if you can't deal with it for 2 minutes, you try for 3, and then that's your goal. And then you do it for 3 minutes. And the next day when it's messy and you got to clean it, you leave that one thing at a place, and then you try to leave it for 4 minutes. And then eventually you start building up this mentality that, okay, you know what? It's actually okay that things are out of place a little bit. So that's the same when it comes to our work life or, again, our family or whatever it is, because expectations are everything, right? Let me do a little bit of a test right here. Who would say that you like the sound of a stress-free life? Give me a bit of a wave if you like the sound of a stress-free life, right? Who would say, wave your hand again, if you think that you actually maybe do things to help achieve that you actually aim for that? Give me a wave if that's anyone. A couple of people there, okay. Now, give me a wave if you actually think that that's truly achievable, to live a completely stress-free life. No one, right? But here's the irony. We are trying to do things to live a stress-free life, but we know it's not even achievable. And so what do you think the resulting frustration is for us trying to do things that we know at a deep level is not even achievable? Well, hey, that's pretty stressful. And so here we are now in a predicament that we're trying to avoid something, but inevitably feeling it. And coming back to perfectionism and standards and expectations of self, that's exactly what it is. That's what we're talking about. The need to ask that question of, how attainable is this really? How reasonable is this really? And how achievable is it? And so whatever expectations you have of yourself, whatever assumptions or whatever rules, ask yourself the question, okay, well, is this a really unrelenting high standard? Where did I get this standard from? And is it actually achievable? Because I might be unknowingly trying to do things in the hope to achieve it, but that's only going to result in greater frustration and greater stress, because at the end of the day, we know it's not possible. So I hope that adds a little bit more context and maybe some specifics that you're all thinking about in terms of, again, whether it's your professional life, your family life, or even your health and fitness goals that you're working on with Aaron. So that was a very long-winded and roundabout way of answering your initial question, Aaron, but hopefully that helps.
I think that was great. I'm a very practical thinker, so I like how you gave a very practical solution around perfectionism and how to break it down. And that's what we talk a lot about in this Mighty Mums, is about breaking it down so it's so simple, and then you build from there. And I think that's something that obviously Linda and Sandra were able to share, but something that I go through, and I think everyone goes through, that high standard of self, and being kind to self, but actually setting expectations that we can never meet and will never meet. But in our head, it's nice to meet in our head. So, and I like that step ladder approach, and just asking yourself the question, why is it so bad if you don't have that perfection goal, whatever it is, in our head? And then we can figure out what is actually driving the behavior. And I find most of the time it's maybe approval of people, or it's something that's externally to me and it's not coming from a good place, which I can identify a lot too. So that's great. That's all I had tonight. I think you covered two main areas, and something that we'll consistently touch on, because I think it's a reoccurring thing when you forget about it. And I think it also ties in with, people saying, I have no time. And I think when you look at what they're spending their time on, it might be the underlying thing is perfectionism. So they're spending the times on things that trying to get everything perfect, which I find with a lot of people. And I'm really glad that you touched on that. And yeah, that's one of the main things I wanted to touch on, is perfectionism and the fear of failure and expectations. Did you have anything else, Jacon?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, just a final comment to everyone, realize that it takes practice. If you actually think about it like a skill, like all skills, they take time to refine and to get better at. And so this idea of letting go of perfectionism and some of the discomfort or some of the unease that it can bring, because it will, when we talk about maybe moving away from some of these perfectionistic behaviors or mindsets, black and white thinking, it actually does take time. And so practice makes perfect, ironically, but, probably poor choice of words. But again, we're talking about actually just putting the practice in. And with that, therefore, being willing to make mistakes, and I do believe so strongly, and maybe even Aaron, I'm going to share a link with him around this growth mindset that he might also want to share with the rest of the group, and have a look at it, because I really do think that the more that you can adopt a growth mindset where you believe that, that effort is something to be really prized after, challenges are actually something that can really lead to amazing progress, and that feedback is all part of that process, we can really start to see failure as feedback. And so therefore we're not afraid to make mistakes. And that's exactly why people are in the black and white thinking, because they think, oh, I've made a mistake, it's completely over, I might as well abandon it. But not at all. Failure is feedback. How do I actually use this as a lesson to realize what I've done wrong, what I can do again? And when you actually take note of that, that's moving forward, because now you have information that you didn't have before and that you wouldn't have without making the mistake. So don't be afraid to make the mistake, because again, that's going to equip you with information that you didn't have and wouldn't have. So in my eyes, that's progress, that's success, and that's moving forward.
Amazing, amazing. Ladies, I'm going to unmute you all, because we're going to give Jacob a hand.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you, Jacob, for coming on. You just had a newborn baby, so he's probably got no sleep. He still comes out to give us all this value. He'll be here sort of every 3 weeks to give us new stuff as well. So he's a bit cooler now. We've got Courtney part of the crew, we've got Jacob part of the crew, so we've got a lot of exciting things moving forward. So I appreciate your time. It's live on Facebook if you want to watch it again, but I'll talk to you all soon.
Great.
Thanks.
Ladies.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.